Vladimir Berezin. Travel Signs, Series, Metro 2033 Universe. Abstract. Metro 2033, by Dmitry Glukovsky, is a cult science fiction novel, the most popular Russian book of recent years. Circulation, 500,000, translations into dozens of languages, plus a grand computer game. This novel inspired a whole galaxy of new writers, and now together they are creating the universe Metro 2033, a series of books based on the famous saga. The adventures of the heroes on Earth, almost destroyed by a nuclear war, go beyond the Moscow Metro. Now the battles for the future of humanity will be fought everywhere. Vladimir Berezin is one of the most interesting modern science fiction writers. His Road Signs is the first and main book of the universe Metro 2033. His heroes will finally get out of the metro and find out the fate of St. Petersburg. Father. Don't tell anyone your dreams. What if Freudians come to power? Stanislav Jerzy Lek. I stood on the edge of the airfield among the tall grass swaying in the wind. The waves went along the runway, parting first one way, then the other, as if someone were stroking the field with a huge palm. I was waiting for my father, and then he appeared, big and strong, and took my hand. I felt his palm and hurried after him when he led me through the fence to the hangars. The sentry saluted us smartly, but we all knew each other for a long time, and everything was a formality. The sentry's movement, my father's answer, and the pass that he never got. The airfield was small, sports, and there were few cars on it. There were few planes and pilots. My father, squinting, looked into the distance and said, "A wonderful day. Visibility 1,000,000 to 1,000,000. He said something to the technicians. They answered indistinctly, waving some papers. Together they buried their noses in these papers, and finally my father beckoned me to follow him. It was hot in the cockpit of the training plane. It smelled of gasoline and hot metal. I loved these smells, but I loved even more the smell of the cockpit when it was not hot, some special smell of electrical appliances. There's almost no smell of fuel on jet planes, but here you feel almost like you are in a car. My father said that the plant allows them to fly on 90-second automobile gasoline. That is why I think so. And my mother said discontentedly that I like to sniff gasoline because I do not have enough iron in my body. I am sitting on the right, my nose buried in the panel of the automatic radio compass, while my father is preparing for takeoff. I remember that film where the boy saved his father and flew the plane over the desert. If anything happens, I'll save him, I think. Running my finger along the scale of the correction mechanism. He'll get into trouble and I'll take him to the hospital. No, let it not be him, but someone else who gets into trouble, and my father and I will save him. We'll land in a remote mountainous area. There will be war and explosions all around, and we'll load the wounded and at the last moment take off into the sky. He'll be just like now, calmly and sternly looking ahead, and I'll be the navigator. And I check whether the correction mechanism is set to 0 before takeoff. My father doesn't look at me, but I know that he sees everything. I tell him the school news, alternating good and bad, and I feel that he's very interested in all this, but a little out of place because now is not the time for him to fly. There was something else I wanted to ask him, but I don't remember what. My father winks at me, as if hinting that he also wanted to tell me something, but not now. You see, work. We sit in the cockpit with my father for a while, and he carefully checks that I have fastened my seat belts, and then accelerates. The plane moves forward, and we, swaying, draw a square on the 2 asphalt strips of the airfield heated by the sun. Then he stops the plane, reducing the engine's speed. I climb out, and the airflow immediately tears the cap off my head. It is my father's cap. And my father says that the headdress is the most important thing in a uniform. The cap is too big for me, but I take care of it more than a collection of chewing gum inserts. The cap slides along the rough concrete, and I run after it, missing the moment when my father starts the car and begins to pick up speed. The wings begin to double and triple in the haze that hangs over the already heated runway, and then finally, far, far away, the line of a training plane lifts off the ground, leaves this haze trembling over the concrete and rises upward. My father makes a turn and passes back over the airfield, having done a barrel roll, and then he spins figures right above my head according to the list of his flight sheet. I go to the hangars, and standing in the shade, I want only one thing, for this to last forever. The changing tone of the working engine on the turns, the plane tumbling in the air against the background of the unbearable blue. And my happiness. I had to ask something very important, and I know that my father will explain everything to me. And I finally remember what exactly. But my father is far away, and his plane, having made a loop, flies off towards the sun. I read one book, a story about pilots during the war, and there in this story, one of our pilots always flew off towards the sun after an attack, so no one could shoot him down. He then landed at an airfield where American pilots were based. We fought together then, and so the Americans drank their whiskey, and he always asked for a little sun with a soda in the canteen. I don't remember the details anymore and what else was in this book. But then this pilot flew off towards the sun after an air battle, not with the Americans, of course, but with the Germans, who attacked us then. He flew off, and no one saw him again. He dissolved in this sun. Then the Americans asked about him, and they were only offered drinks. And the Americans cried, because we fought together then, and when your friend didn't land, how could you not cry? That's why when my father drinks with his friends, they raise a toast to the number of takeoffs matching the number of landings. They have many more toasts, and there was also a rule not to say last, but to say last. And so I watch as my father goes off towards the huge solar disk, which is beginning to set, and I wait. I wait for a very long time. It seems like I've been waiting forever. At this moment, I always wake up. When I dream about my father, I always wake up in this place, and my blanket is completely wet with sweat. I'm just swimming in a puddle of sweat, and a long time ago, that is, in childhood, it seemed to me that these were tears. But this, of course, is not so, but some kind of physiological reaction. These dreams come to me once a month, and sometimes a little more often. A long time ago, I consulted our doctor, and he said that this is probably a reaction to the full moon and new moon. The doctor said that women have it too, and laughed. It's not like women. Now I understand this joke. I've been having these dreams for 20 years, and we have a new doctor, and the old one has already died. I was also told that these dreams come to me because during the cataclysm, the doctor also called what happened the cataclysm. I was affected by an electromagnetic pulse. I was then treated for headaches, for vascular spasms with weak currents, and one thing overlapped with another and turned into nightly dates with my father. Everything would be fine, but it's very hard to wake up. And not because I'm completely wet, but because the dream is over. I have to keep quiet about this, because they already look at me like I'm crazy. I turned the mattress over with the wet side down and changed the blanket. My father left for relatives in St. Petersburg a few days before the cataclysm. He was supposed to fly in a week later, and now he hasn't been with me for 20 years. I'd like to think that he's there, too, in the city on the Neva, sleeping and having strange dreams, where I talk to him and where we're sitting together in the cockpit of his plane. My mother died 10 years ago, but not from radiation sickness, not from all that crap we got right after the cataclysm, but from something completely incomprehensible. Sometimes I think she died because she didn't have enough light. They found her in the morning, turned to the wall with a completely calm expression on her face. Very calm, I would say. And she never appeared in my dreams. And my life was spent in the dungeons between Sokol and Dynamo. I was born in Petersburg when it had already become Petersburg again, but I lived in this city for a very short time. My parents had moved to Moscow a long time ago. We lived next to Beloruskaya, and I should have lived at a rich Hanseatic station, but fate, which brought me underground, took me further. Fate dragged me further beyond the Hanseatic barrier, there, where at 3 metro stations we were doing the most necessary thing. As the chief of the Sokol station said, we grow grain, breed pigs, and preserve slime. He spoke like a real chief on holidays. Our chief said this, waving his hand, as all previous chiefs had done, and future ones will orate, if, of course, we have a future in this underground world. I noticed that they all said pig and not pigs. For some reason they felt more confident if the word pig was used in the singular. They felt much calmer that way. I didn't like pigs either. Pigs always scared me, but there was no way to get away from them. Not to breed bees in tunnels. And the head of the Sokol station, Butov, was a strong manager. No one but him could have kept the wayward pig farmers, the sullen mushroom slug collectors and technicians like me, in obedience. The power of the Sokol head extended all the way to the Dynamo station, where, incidentally, the sewing and leather industries had their own bosses, only thinner and smaller, and Butov was great and vast in both senses of the last word. He could even lift a water tank with one hand. As a child, I believed that the Zabukovano symbol on maps, which referred to blocked tunnels and closed ventilation shafts, referred to his name. The slime, however, was not slime, but a mysterious mold that helped with many diseases, a food additive that first caused horror and then became an expensive export commodity. The day rolled along as usual, and it was all one name, day-night, day away. With artificial light, both day and night are all the same. They used to say that people should automatically switch to a 48-hour day. But everyone had a different experience. For us, those who worked on the miracle seed plantations, it was, on the contrary, a 12-hour day. You work a little, and then you sleep right in the greenhouses. But for the pig farmers, everything depended on their charges. When they were sleeping, the pig farmers walked around like zombies, and when the pigs woke up, the pig farmers ran around the animal farm cheerfully. I didn't have many friends, but one was worth 10. The main and best one was the old railroad worker, Vladimir Pavlovich. At first he seemed like an old man to me, but that was a consequence of the attitude towards age in youth. When everyone who is 10 years older than you seems old. Now I understand that the point was also in the fact that before the cataclysm, he managed to live some kind of adult life, and I did not. And then the age difference, as always happens, was erased. Vladimir Pavlovich wore a railroad uniform. I really liked it, because it was impossible to confuse Vladimir Pavlovich with anyone else. Where he found this uniform to replace, The worn-out one is completely unclear. Everyone knew the history of the metro by heart. At some stations, they even forced children to learn it, as if it were God's law. Therefore, everyone knew that by the decree of the government of the Russian Federation of January 3rd, 1992, number 4, as if any of us remembered what the previous 3 were, the metro was transferred to the municipal ownership of the city of Moscow. The main metropolitan of the MPS was liquidated. The same thing happened with the metros of other cities, but now we did not care about other cities, and the old-style uniform meant, as it were, the previous life. Vladimir Pavlovich wore a railroad worker's uniform, and his cap was old-fashioned, with crossed hammers on the band. I once asked him what the second hammer was. Vladimir Pavlovich answered that it was a French key. I was embarrassed and didn't ask again. I just went to the library. The library was old, abandoned, and I spent time there as a boy when I felt bad or wanted to hide. I leafed through the dictionaries, swollen from dampness, and it turned out that in English it was a monkey wrench. It really used to be called a locomotive wrench, but now everyone just called it an adjustable wrench. I rolled the word monkey around in my mouth. A funny name, yes. Then I came up with a simple explanation. It was that Vladimir Ivanovich had several sets of old uniforms hidden somewhere. Yes, old. Maybe he found a bundle of old jackets and caps on the side tracks or in the depot, because it is impossible to keep the set issued to you for so long. No, actually, I don't know. Mystical things happen here. The story about the silver train alone was worth something. Baba Toma also told me that once a year through the tunnels, the silver train passes, and if you jump on it, you can leave the metro far, far away, to a country where there is a sky and people live there in a completely different way. My older comrade had another rather strange trait. Vladimir Pavlovich managed to get drunk every day in an amazing way. We drank rarely, but violently, with fights and long proceedings. And Vladimir Pavlovich drank quietly and secretly, without showing it to anyone. I think that he lived at the trading stations because alcohol production was established there. Of course, this habit was not simple. Vladimir Pavlovich showed amazing ingenuity in servicing his drunkenness, but remained a secret drunkard. Drunk and smart, 2 pleasures in him, said the station master, Sokol, once, and Vladimir Pavlovich's hands were indeed golden. No one reproached him for his mead, and I liked to talk to him after dinner, but in the morning and evening I did not like Vladimir Pavlovich. But I was free to swear, because when you live half your life with a person, especially here, you understand that only death, just like in the marriage vows of churches alien to us, only death will separate us. Sometimes I imagined the entire metro space, torn apart by contradictions, populated by embittered people ready to sell each other for a handful of bullets, in order to then fill a Kalashnikov with them and kill someone else. When I started thinking like that, I always pulled myself up, telling myself that there, behind the border post at Beloruskaya, live exactly the same people as me, with exactly the same thoughts. And as soon as they stop feuding, it turns out that they are all made of the same meat and bones. Some operetta fascists at Pushkinskaya and craftsmen at Kuznetsky, most, and white collars of Polis and anarchists at Voikovskaya. Where will we go from this underwater, or rather underground, boat? Vladimir Pavlovich himself said about the people around us. I wanted to suppress the feeling of disgusted hatred towards these human beings, because I knew that it was born of fear. One priest, who came from the underground temples under Yelokovskaya to preach the word of God to us, said that I thought correctly. and this hatred must be transformed into love. I nodded in time with his speech, but I knew that I personally would not be able to transform anything into love. I am not the material to be suitable for perestroika. The priest, rustling his shabby cassock, went in the direction of Voikovskaya, a station with a complicated history occupied by anarchists, and no one has seen him since then. At least he did not pass us back. I don't know how and what happened to him, whether he converted someone to his faith or slugs devoured him in the tunnels, and no one knew. Voikovskaya was generally considered a cursed station by us, firstly, because of the name. It was named after the man who killed the last Russian Tsar, or the man who ordered his death. I don't remember exactly. But secondly, and most importantly, they told a lot of bad things about it in terms of radiation. The tunnel there was shallow. The contamination was stronger than ours, so a lot of strange things proliferated there. Nearby on the surface, there was still an aviation institute and factories, in which a lot of strange electronics were stuffed, and there were legends that this combat electronics united into one electric mind with the help of the surviving aviation engineers. These engineers allegedly dug in their bomb shelters near Voikovskaya and held the line against everyone, both their own and others, with the help of combat humanoid robots. These robots chased away anarchists from Voikovskaya, who were trying to establish their power there and at the slightest provocation hid in their tangled underground communications. They lied about the robots, though. As far as I understand, there was no reason for the humanoid appearance of these Terminators. But they still didn't like the engineers. Next to us, for example, were giant underground spaces that belonged to the Alma's Scientific and Industrial Association, which once made anti-aircraft missile systems. The confrontation began, as usual, with a small thing with a drunken brawl. Having drunk too much homebrew, our guys started shouting that the anti-aircraft gunners had failed to protect the peace and peaceful sleep of the country. They responded without much repentance, and eventually people took up knives and then guns. And at some point, I was very little then and knew all this only from retellings. Even a small war broke out, which ended in a bad peace. After this short war with the anti-aircraft gunners, the Voikovsky anarchists, and along with them the technicians from the aviation clan, blocked the tunnels and sealed the small passages. The peace agreement was that we communicated using an electric cable. That is, it was unprofitable for anyone to fight, but we couldn't even swear. There was no communication except for the cable from which the technicians were powered. I think that over the last 10 years, not a single person from Sokol, having gone to the technicians, has returned. And all this, I repeat, happened long before I appeared here. Now no one communicated with anyone, although now we let through the tunnel everyone who went further in the direction of Voikovskaya. However, most of the service communications were blocked, or even mined. We could only guess what was happening behind these partitions. The children were told that mutants lived there, who would take them to their kingdom if they were capricious and did not eat the nutritious mushrooms and pork. Many understood with their minds that very smart people had met behind the barriers in these alien tunnels and shelters, but now Sokol's attempts to make friends with them were and remained nothing more than a dream. In a word, our relations were marked by a way sign of a horizontally crossed circle, which said that there was no further to go. The further, the more I liked to go along the side corridors towards the airport streets, where I found an exit into a deep basement shelter. In this basement, a gigantic library was living out its last days. I read everything, cookbooks that are no longer suitable for cooking, and biographies of people who have been forgotten, textbooks of foreign languages, languages that perhaps no one spoke anymore after the cataclysm. Vladimir Pavlovich did not approve of this activity, but to the same extent that I did not approve of his alcoholic experiments. "You know, Sasha," he told me once, "I look at you and I understand that you are a clear illustration of a mutation unknown to us. You look like a healthy boar, yes, a boar." Here he hesitated and after a pause continued. "Boar, you must have read about this, something like our pigs, so you are a healthy man, but you behave like a nerd." "A nerd? And I want to leave the greenhouse? I thought you read about this, too." "A nerd is a skinny boy who studies diligently at school, obeys his parents, and spends all his time with books." Right. I remembered that word. I saw it in books, but I didn't remember what botanists were called at school. I used to remember, but then I forgot. One thing is for sure. We were all a little bit botanists because we wore protective glasses from bright light. Our eyes had long since gotten used to the dungeons, where not only was there no light, but it was just as rare as clean water. In fact, there was some, but try to find a good source, an underground stream, set up a pipe from it, provide drainage. A good sewer specialist could be exchanged for a dozen snipers. I realized long ago that the hierarchy of specialists is constantly changing. Sometimes fighters, defenders, and miners were in demand, sometimes engineers and builders. The cataclysm didn't just shake us up. It didn't even throw society back. It led us not along the old path, but somewhere to the side. However, sometimes very strange skills could come in handy. For example, I've been a good slingshot shooter since childhood. And about 10 years ago, some kind of mass psychosis of slingshot shooting competitions for money began. And I managed not only to be among the winners, but even to earn good money from it. True, when I was offered to hunt rats in this way, I refused. It's not my business. For some reason I had respect for rats. Rats are very smart people, although a lot of nonsense has been said about them. They have excellent coordination and a sense of space. You can make friends with a rat and, by lightly knocking on the wall, call a rat from the dungeon. This is all because rats have excellent hearing and are very sensitive to vibrations. But perhaps I transfer my respect for one rat to all the others. But more on that later. Vladimir Pavlovich and I had spent many years talking. Today he brought the carts to the greenhouse and we sat down at the modest dinner table. Vladimir Pavlovich immediately took a sip from his flask, and we began talking, as always, about the meaning of life. The meaning of life is what I called it, although our topics were very strange. Now Vladimir Pavlovich looked me in the eyes. "You don't remember it very well in your youth, but I'll tell you. Immediately after the cataclysm, many of those who survived were in a state of euphoria. For them it was liberation, after all, before they had suffered, worried, fussed. In their lives, there were bosses, families where there was often no happiness, and most importantly, the idea that they were all losers. They didn't earn enough. Their renovations weren't done. Their dacha wasn't finished. And then, bam! Everything disappeared. Of course, life was no longer a bed of roses, and people started getting sick more often. But those who were really sick quickly died out. But those who came to such a simplified state felt very comfortable. It was a second chance for losers, and most importantly, no office slavery. And after all, we had a lot of people doing something that wasn't their business. People were wasting their time in offices, impatiently waiting for Fridays to happily get drunk, drink all Saturday and Sunday, endure the reproaches of unloved wives or husbands, think with horror that children are naughty, have fallen into bad company, understand that the years are passing, and nothing has been done. To learn with envy that peers have become rich, have gone abroad, and are generally more successful than you. Mental torment is always harder than physical. You get used to physical torment or die, depending on its severity. And here, after the cataclysm, overnight, all at once, success became tangible. Success is that you are alive, that you got a ration in the greenhouse or trade, profitably, with the Hanseatic stations. This is the new Middle Ages that has been talked about for so long. Well, you don't know, but believe me, they have talked about it. And this is a much simpler civilization than it was. It has all the same boss-subordinate connections, but now it is master-worker. Marxism, you have no idea what Marxism is, but believe me, my generation was all brought up on it. So Marxism has become real again. The world is understandable. Here they are, here we are. Here is food, and here are clothes. But you can't live like this for long. And I read about Marxism. Well, why not? However, what do you mean by long? What is long for us? If you are talking about Marxism, then quantity should turn into quality. This is not Marxism. This is in you from inattentive reading. The transition of quantity into quality is Hegel, dialectics. Okay, Hegel. But something has to happen. Yes, it is clear that there has to be an exit to the surface, or some monsters will eat us. Well, think about it. Why would monsters eat us? What do they need from us? What is so honey-smeared in people that they were saved in the subway? To win back the subway from them. But if intelligent mutants and even irrational ones lived for 20 years in their own place, even in the case of a delta mutation, what reason do they have to go underground? I can assume that the most intelligent of them are looking for contact with us. Maybe they want to coexist with us. We can always assume the most fantastic. For example, that the most intelligent consider us a delicacy. They will set up farms, breed us like pigs. Then we discussed the rumors about the Kurchatov Institute. There, next to the Oktyabrskoye Pole Station, there was a whole city, and on one side it was connected to the shelters and underground premises of the main intelligence directorate on Khoroshevskoye Highway, and on the other side to the Kurchatov Institute. They said that yesterday there was shooting on the distant borders, and someone, apparently, wanted to break through to us. You know where we get the opportunity to grow miracle grain, right? Someone asked me. In general, everyone knew this, but no one talked about it. The electricity that lit our plantations around the clock was produced by the same force that drove us underground. It came from the newly launched reactors of the Kurchatov Institute, and we had no shortage of it at our stations. And since there was plenty of time, I took to reading in this free light. There were 2 reactors operating at the Kurchatov Institute, and there was a special agreement with the people who lived there. It is clear that they were not paid with cartridges, but by a complex system of mutual offsets. There were rumors that there were giant warehouses of diesel fuel near Moscow, which no one got to in the first 5 years after the cataclysm. And then it turned out that it had spoiled. They tried to refine and filter it, but nothing came of it. The energy of diesel generators turned out to be an expensive thing. They did something with the fuel, but in my opinion, they didn't do enough. The fuel was stratified into fractions, some resins were precipitated, thin engine pipes were clogged. In general, some kind of difficulties were constantly arising with these fuel reserves. Someone told me that it would be cheaper to build an oil refinery, but for this all Muscovites had to make peace, and no one had the will to end the civil strife at once. Look at what he wanted, an oil refinery. They said that the mythical Bowmanites, residents of the engineering dungeons in the northeast, came up with some kind of technology for reviving not only diesel fuel, but also gasoline that had completely lost its properties. But where are those Baumanites? No one knew for sure whether any engineers from the huge institutes in the Baumanskaya area had survived. Were they really there? It is not known. We knew nothing. But despite the unknown, I had not been surprised for a long time by this world, which changed from kilometer to kilometer, finally taking shape at the new station into a world, sometimes outwardly similar, but already completely different. For example, I could easily distinguish dynamo from airport by smells, not to mention the world of Sokol with its gigantic spaces and amazing animal farms. The neat residents of Dynamo, the soldiers of the Tailor's Front, lived completely differently from the pig farmers from Sokol. And it was not even that Dynamo was a deep-level station, and say, airport was built in an open way. It was not the size of the underground cities, which of course were not limited to the stretches and stations, but stretched far to the sides, along underground rivers, chained in collectors, along abandoned communications, sometimes ending in karst caves, and sometimes in bunkers and bomb shelters abandoned by people. It was all about lifestyle, which is sometimes determined by quite random factors. Lifestyle was connected both with the kind of people who accidentally ended up at the station 20 years ago, and with the path they had taken during that time. And if everything was so difficult for us, then one could only imagine how bizarre the underground people were beyond the borders of our stable region. We have peace and quiet. Everyone needs us. We are the bins of the subway and its border, and there is the howling of wolves, the gnashing of teeth, and the counting of life is not in hours, but in bullets. There is a war there, and we have pork and even grain. We have chickens the size of watermelons. We even have watermelons, only that is why they are white inside, but sweet as sugar. But watermelons are just entertainment, an expensive toy. Vladimir Pavlovich once said that we live like Denmark during the penultimate war. At that time, occupied Denmark fed the Germans, and no one found fault with the Danes. Of course, you burn and shoot the breadwinner, so where are you going to get butter and bread? Somehow it happened to us too. Our time flowed like oil in heating systems. I had long ago become a specialist in low-current equipment. Yes, by the way, I also repaired hydroponic equipment, repaired bioreactors. I did a lot of other things because I was not afraid of electricity. The woman who looked after the farm and living conditions, kind Granny Toma, was kind to me, and even tolerated Vladimir Pavlovich's visits with his flasks and bottles. I guess that she wanted to see me as a son, but I was not like her boy, who perished in civil strife somewhere at the southern stations of the metro. Outwardly, Baba Toma looked like a classic Russian grandmother, but I knew that she had some kind of difficult fate behind her. I once told her last name to the head of the regime in Police and brought the interlocutor into a state of stupor. Rashidova herself. Rashidova, he muttered, although I never got any details out of him. She had been in some difficult institutions before the cataclysm and clearly not in simple positions. She had a very accurate eye for people, sometimes merciless, and sometimes, as in my case, sparing. Kind, I would say, although this word is stupid and does not explain anything. About 10 years ago, at a fur farm, I got under the fang of a winch, which ripped my leg open. I was partly to blame for this. Without checking the equipment, I turned on the electric motor and began to lift an oversized load. But the cable snapped, the teeth loosened, and a 100-kilogram piece of hardened steel fell almost exactly on me. I fell into the pig pen, and while I was unconscious, they gnawed at my leg. After that, I lay in bed for 2 months, and Baba Toma literally fed me. That's why she really was like a real grandmother to me. No, not a mother, but a grandmother. By the way, my grandfather was also, you could say, an old Korean named Kim, who came a long time ago from the Timiryazevskaya. Kim taught me Korean gymnastics. At first they thought that Kim had a special martial art and could teach how to kill a person with his bare hands. It turned out that he really was a specialist in gymnastics, but a completely peaceful one. Then interest in him disappeared. Everyone ran off to learn something more bloodthirsty, and I remained the only student. Under Kim's supervision, I set up a gym in an abandoned junction between the tunnels and lifted pieces of rail there instead of a barbell. I really liked it, because it was even more pleasant than reading. You could think about nothing but your breathing. When I came to the Sokol, I discovered that our pig lovers were in some strange confusion. I went into the locker room under the stairs and started drinking tea with the pigmen. It turned out that they had also heard something about the shootout on the distant approaches to Sokol and were expecting an invasion. I was amazed at the pig farmers. On the one hand, I really liked people who were in their place and doing important and necessary work. On the other hand, I was a stranger to them, and everyone felt it, both me and them. I was one of the clean ones, but they had to tolerate me because they couldn't live without electricity. So we ate and drank together. I laughed at their rude jokes. Sometimes I told something funny myself, but still we were a little wary of each other. That is, so wary that they would have fed me to the pigs without thinking, as long as it would benefit the pigs. But the pigs, apparently, hadn't asked them about it yet, and the pig farmers hadn't decided yet whether I would be of any use to their contingent. Vladimir Pavlovich was openly disgusted by pig farmers, and not at all because of the smell. Although there was a subtle but quite noticeable smell of ammonia on the fur farm, it was not this that was disgusting to Vladimir Pavlovich. "I'll tell you the truth," he explained. "I'm afraid of your pigs, and I'm afraid of the people who work with them, too. Our pigs are too similar to people. Even before the cataclysm, they had the intelligence of a dog, and now even more so. Humans, however, are less clean, and the physiology of a pig is very similar to that of a human. The structure of the heart is exactly like that of a human, and our diseases are similar. Shit even stinks the same. But you see, a pig is also a social animal. Children are not allowed to leave the family when they grow up. But if something goes wrong, they will eat them. Matriarchy, too. What does matriarchy have to do with it? I don't know. Besides, I feel bad around pig farmers, because sometimes I can't tell the difference between the wards and the guardians. Then the replacements came to us and said that there would be no invasion, but an embassy would arrive from the Voikovskaya direction on a handcar pulled by mutant dogs. The dogs there talk, the narrator noted, as if it were self-evident. They objected that there couldn't be any dogs there, but couldn't they have arrived on humanoid robots? In the end, everyone began to agree that it was unlikely that the embassy had arrived on robots. Most likely they were just the robots themselves. That is, They had sent us humanoid liaison robots. I almost spat in frustration. I couldn't argue with them. Although the devil knows these aviation engineers, they said that they, defending themselves from mutants, tried to penetrate the tunnel through the rift, took a jet engine from a fighter jet from the test stands of the MiG Design Bureau, which was nearby, mounted it in the tunnel with the nozzle facing outward, and burned out all the ghouls. Later it would turn out that they were not humanoid, but still robots, that they were not with the embassy, but just with some information. But now it was impossible to understand anything. Although the fact that the aviators wanted to make peace with us was news in itself. True, it was wasted news. Every year, everyone hoped that they would come to make peace, and each time it turned out that no one came to us. I went to check the automatic feeders. There was a cliff, and the automatic feed tray in the far rows did not work. When I returned, I found the pig farmers huddled on the platform. Everyone was waiting for guests. And then they appeared. A trolley with 3 aliens arrived at the Sokol. One, however, was lying flat among the boxes. He was mowed down by a burst of fire from our vigilant guard. I thought that the guard would receive gratitude, but he was almost shot. It turned out that the aliens had come through the channels of D6, the secret underground, straight from the Kurchatov Institute, and were giving all the required conditional signals. There really were signals. I remember when I was on patrol on the Sokol, they once read me a list of conditional signals that people from the other side could give. But no one had seen any guests from there for 10 years, and everyone had forgotten what those fractional flashes of a flashlight looked like and how the conditional words sounded. And so the guard, in a panic, gave a burst of fire from a machine gun, violating several provisions of the guard service regulations at once. And now a trolley with 2 guests and 1 half-corpse appeared in front of us. A gray-haired man was lying on the iron floor and groaning, his eyes closed. When they were loading him into the infirmary, I noticed how his leg was involuntarily twitching, his heel was scraping against the metal, and he couldn't calm down. "He's not a long-term resident." Vladimir Petrovich confirmed my guess. "He won't last until tomorrow." And that's what happened. Several times I passed by the office where the aliens had locked themselves in and were talking to the station master. Then right before our eyes, they unloaded about 20 boxes from a cart. In some of them I unmistakably guessed that they were zinc boxes with cartridges, and it was clear that these weren't old supplies, but freshly canned butter mushrooms. I don't remember who taught me the word butter mushrooms, but I, a peaceful person, really liked it. The conversations went on until the evening, and then the next day the strangest thing happened. I was called to the office for a completely different reason. Something incomprehensible was happening with the canning machine. The cans were coming out leaky. It wasn't our fault. The problem was the defective tin we were getting through the Hanseatic League. I was waiting for my turn, sitting on a stool in the corridor, when suddenly all 3 of them came out of the corner. Our boss, a balding man with large face-distorting glasses, and a short Asian man. "It's all pointless," said the bespectacled man, and it was obvious that, although he was speaking calmly, he was barely holding back. "We had a pilot, and now we don't have a pilot. Can you find us a pilot?" The boss muttered something. It was the first time I had seen the head of the Sokol station like that. He used to call in and scold a negligent worker, and hear some unknown guy in an icy tone, but in a rage, scolded the boss. "On the circle line, you'll be looking for a pilot for a year. and will throw your switch in a month. No, you can't give birth to a pilot, I understand. But where will he come from? And then I did something that surprised me later. Of course, if I had seen from the outside how Vladimir Pavlovich would do this, I wouldn't have been surprised, but I would have simply thought that the day had already rolled from lunch to evening and he was completely drunk. But Vladimir Pavlovich, no matter how drunk, would never have done such a thing. The vaults of the subway would have collapsed on us sooner. Or I saw women from Dynamo who were overcome by some inexplicable melancholy once a year, and they did completely incomprehensible things. One of them sewed her hand to a pigskin with an automatic sewing machine. When our orderlies led her away, she smiled blissfully, and that smile was one of the most terrible pictures I have ever seen. Sometimes we were observers of how people went crazy, especially in the first 3 or 4 years of being underground. But here the main character was myself. Some kind of gloom led me, and I, as if throwing off a heavy rubberized cape from a protective suit, freeing myself and taking a deep breath, stood up. I stood up from my stool and said, "I am a pilot." I distinctly remember that I didn't say it very loudly, but the silence that immediately followed suddenly hit me hard in the ears. The station master looked at me rather dumbly, not fully understanding what had happened. For the first time in my life, I surprised Butov, and I would have remembered it forever. It would have become the main event of my life. Legends would have been told about me, but the subsequent events were much cooler. The bald, bespectacled man stared into my eyes. He had a very nasty look, some kind of appraising. That's how pig farmers looked at our elite pigs before hitting them in the heart with an electrode, with love and cruelty fused together. How many hours office flight? The bespectacled man exhaled in several steps. 10, I said. His face swelled. His muscles somehow floated and went down, like paraffin melts in the heat. It was clear that he didn't like 10. He would have liked it even less if he had found out that I had no newer hours of independent flight time. I had no independent flight time, and I couldn't have any by age, but after 20 years of living in the metro, age was erased for all of us. However, I understood that something had changed in the world. Something had happened that had irreparably changed my life. Gliders? Hang gliders? No, I answered. Yak 18. T training. The bespectacled man suddenly tilted his head to the side, and almost resting it on his shoulder, began to look at me as if from a lying position. "Where is the start lever?" he asked quickly. "A button. Not a lever, but a button. The engine start button is the one on the far left on the panel. What's on the right? To the right of it is the air system pressure gauge." He took off his glasses and began to wipe them. His companion remained silent, as did our station chief. Butov looked at me as if I were a man who had taken off his boot before his eyes, stuck his big toe into the trigger guard, and stuck the barrel of a gun into his mouth. About 5 years ago, I had seen a similar scene, but then everyone had rushed at the suicide and snatched the gun from his hands. No one said anything, and the pause dragged on and on. The bespectacled man finally wiped his glasses and, turning around, said, "I'll take him," and another one, whom he points out. But not a very fat one. He said the last words, already addressing me, and added, "Mirzo, follow him, and let him carry the things to our quarters." The Asian, it turned out, responded to the incomprehensible word, Mirzo. While I was walking with him, I spent half the way wondering whether it was a first or last name. I knew a foreman of pig farmers, a Uyghur by nationality, but he had a simple name, Roman. And then there was Mirzo. I never found out the name of his boss, and I christened him the Mathematician. The Mathematician looked like my teacher at school, and to say that I didn't like this school despot is to say nothing. However, Vladimir Pavlovich had gone somewhere. I waited for him, waited, but in the end I dragged my bag to a new place. The guests stayed with us in a very privileged corner in a special cabin for VIP guests. They had their own toilet and a table in the middle of the room. Not a homemade one, but a real antique table from Stalin's times, strong, durable, on which stood several cans of stew and a loaf of fresh bread. It wasn't that I was starving, but it suddenly became clear to me that this magnificence could be used without restrictions, outside of rations and distributors. That's how they put a vase of fruit on the table in old novels. They gave me a bunk, and I stretched out on it, looking at the boards of the wide tier. Everything inside was shaking. I had made my choice, and we'll see later, for better or for worse. These are people from Kurchatnik. They came to fly somewhere. There are ruins of the Air Force Academy near us. They probably want to find something there. Or maybe they don't want to fly, but just take some equipment. And our guys killed their specialist, and now I'm taking his place. No, that's not it. They would rather look for an engineer if they needed to find some equipment. Or they would hire someone. No, they clearly need to fly somewhere. The next day, I went to get Vladimir Pavlovich. After listening to me, he was silent for a minute. I swear, I counted the seconds of his silence, and these seconds were drawn out and long, like old grease from rolling stock. And then he boiled over. He got ready much faster than me, and again under Mirzo's escort, we went to the aliens' apartments. The most important conversation was supposed to happen now, although I understood that it was a pure formality. I had agreed a long time ago, and whatever happened, it was only about the destination. And indeed, the mathematician stood up with his joker in front of us and began, as the head of the so-called station usually began his New Year's speeches. "Congratulations," said the mathematician. "I am heartily glad." The last words, in my opinion, were completely idiotic, dangling at the end of the phrase like unnecessary weight. "I am the head of the expedition," continued the mathematician, "which must travel approximately 700 kilometers and reach the city of Petersburg for research purposes. I wonder, I thought to myself, does he talk to his wife the same way? My dear, I am forced by circumstances and authorized to make tea, and I also made a purchase of a portion of pork protein in addition to the rations. Or how do they have rations? Stop. Petersburg. That is, we need to get to Petersburg, to the city where my father disappeared, to the city that I sometimes dream about, where there is a square with a garden, a stone with a horseman, and a round dome. Now I guess there is no dome. Probably nothing remains of it, but everything else. To the city where I was finally born." My thoughts got tangled up like wires under trays with pig feed. Because of this tangle of sparking wires, I once spent several hours with hungry pigs, and these creatures almost ate me. And because of the confusion in my own head, I just missed one moment in the mathematician's speech. It seemed that something happened in his head, as if someone had switched a switch, and a record player started working inside the mathematician. The mathematician stood in front of us and suddenly began to creak, like some kind of organ. His voice was inhuman at that moment, somehow unnatural. "I am authorized to guarantee you a material reward after completing the task. You will be granted citizenship of some of the safest stations. Your work will be in demand and well paid, and as the highest act of trust, We will be given a personal weapon if you unquestioningly and promptly obey our instructions, if you strictly keep internal departmental secrets. A well-deserved reward awaits you. If you violate our agreement, then you will suffer severe punishment in accordance with field conditions. Damn! I've heard something like that somewhere. Or maybe I read it. He stood before us like an enemy officer before prisoners, trying to persuade them to betray us, or like a pirate before prisoners. "We agree," Vladimir Pavlovich said quickly. The mathematician fixed him with his predatory gaze, but Vladimir Pavlovich was unperturbed and only doused the stranger with his foul alcoholic exhaust. The mathematician grimaced and took a step back, but to his credit, he said nothing. And not everyone could stand that smell, not everyone at all. Then the mathematician turned his gaze to me. He had a short conversation with me. Firstly, I volunteered myself, and secondly, he had nothing to do without me. "I agree," I answered casually. "They did give us weapons, 2 brand-new machine guns in factory grease, but for some reason without numbers. No, the numbers were not filed off. They simply weren't there. No one applied them to the steel before bluing. And this immediately alerted me. Well, everything alerted me. But such a weapon meant that the mathematician was not a random adventurer, but a person of some structure. The authorities were armed, especially. The mathematician had a huge automatic pistol, and Mirzo had 2 barrels at once, a machine gun and a sniper rifle. Mirzo, as I understood, was something like an adjutant to the mathematician, an adjutant and a bodyguard at the same time. The next day, I began to disassemble the machine gun, carefully replacing the lubricant. Mirzo was sitting nearby and cleaning his machine gun. "Have you ever killed?" he suddenly asked. "No," I answered with a pure heart. He looked at me with distrust, as if I were a person who suddenly admitted that he had no legs. "This is all nonsense. I have seen many people who talked about their bloody exploits as if they had paved the entire stretch from Pushkinskaya to Barrikadnaya with corpses. One of them once joined our pig farmers. I did not believe his senseless stories and thought that he was simply inflating his value. When our medium said that he was not lying, I continued to doubt. Because if you repeat the same stories for several years in a row, then you yourself will believe them. You will chatter about past exploits like a parrot, and in a year or two, no medium will be able to distinguish an invented life from a lived one. But then people came from behind the ring and said that it was all true. He shot and killed. His hands were covered in blood up to the elbows and all that. I was very surprised. He looked so much like an irresponsible, stupid chatterbox. He had long been assigned to slaughter pigs, but no one recognized him as one of their own. The pig farmers disdained him. And there was nothing worthwhile about him, a stupid guy and a lousy slaughterer. I carefully oiled the weapon, wiped my hands, and thought that I had never hated anyone except people. I loved underground animals, maybe because I had never seen real mutants. No, I was afraid of mutants, but these were childhood fears. The way you fear the evil babai when your mother scares you with him, so that you and the boys don't run out of the yard, or the way children are afraid of the dark. I even loved the pet rat of a girl from the neighboring station. This rat knew how to come out of the darkness when I knocked. It was slightly mutated, but the mutation was good for it, in the sense that it improved its mind. There was nothing bloodthirsty about this rat, although in the sewing shop at Dynamo, they claimed that it was this rat that bit off some gossip's finger. I can't say for sure, although there were always plenty of gossips there. I suspect that the tailoring and sewing people, if given free rein, would have bitten off not only each other's fingers, but also their heads. So this rat was extremely smart and, as it seemed to me, could understand human speech. I was afraid of it, this wise rat, although perhaps it was precisely because I liked its owner. And if you quarrel with such a pet, then the owner will not become kinder to you. Not at all. But this rat seemed to know somehow that I had refused to hunt its relatives and was kind to me. In a word, people always seemed to me the most dangerous creatures. In the cemetery and in the forest, the most terrible beast is man. The chief of the so-called station always echoed me when the border patrols complained to him about unseen monsters. But we hadn't seen forests, not counting the settling ponds overgrown with some kind of lightless bast, for about 20 years, and we had seen even fewer cemeteries. There was no room for cemeteries underground. They would stick you in a bioreactor, or the pigs would eat you, and the natural cycle of proteins would begin. They say that at one time they tried to cremate people and bury their ashes. But somehow, over the years, the metro population became much more cynical. So we were getting ready for the trip. Several times, without parting, we went to Dynamo for all the boxes that our hosts had brought and locked them in the utility room behind the ammunition warehouse. Where the mythical plane is, they haven't told us yet.